Imagine you're programming an automated hot dog stand. You've just opened up shop, looked at the line, and counted 5 customers. Easy algorithm, you think. I'll just serve 1 hot dog 5 times. But then, more people start lining up for lunch. In that case, you change the algorithm to keep serving people while you still have hot dogs. The first algorithm uses a for loop. For loops are also known as definite iterations because you definitely know how many times you'll iterate through a loop. The second algorithm uses a while loop. This is known as an indefinite iteration because you don't know how many times you'll iterate through a loop until you've run your program. A few things differ between while loops and for loops. The first is the conditional line. In this case, the conditional num hot dogs is greater than 0 returns either true or false. The code block inside the while loop will only run while the condition is true. If the condition is false, the code in the while loop will not run, or it will break from its loop and move on to the rest of your code. The other thing you probably noticed is the last line in our code block. Once you've served a hot dog, you need to remember that you now have 1 fewer hot dog. This way, once you're out of hot dogs, your while loop will break and move on to the rest of your program. If you forget to reduce the number of hot dogs in your inventory, your loop will go on forever, looping indefinitely. Let's leave this hot dog stand and explore a programming problem you're likely to encounter. In most instances, you'll know at the beginning of an iteration how many times you need to execute a block of code. For all of those instances, you'll want to use a for loop. But for instances where you won't know how many times to iterate your block of code until you actually execute your code, you'll need a while loop. While loops are often used to implement a listener loop. Listener loops are used in functions where you are obtaining user input. The loop will repeat indefinitely until a particular input is received. For example, if you're asking the user to type the characters shown in a particular CAPTCHA, you'll be looking for only one valid answer. If the user answers with something else, you'll want to ask them again. Let's look at this CAPTCHA example in more detail to see how you might use a while loop. A CAPTCHA is a system for validating that an input is coming from a human instead of a machine. In this case, when the user is presented with a CAPTCHA, your program is expecting a specific answer associated with your image. Any other input will be considered invalid. Let's focus on building this sort of validation function for our CAPTCHA. To begin, we'll name the function getCAPTCHAAnswer. This function will not take any parameters. We'll also need a Boolean variable to help us with our while loop. Here, we're using the not keyword with our valid input Boolean to build our while loop conditional. This way, the code will read, while not a valid input, run the following code block. Remember, since valid input is false and not negates the false value, you actually get a true value, and your loop will run at least once. In the while loop, we'll show a CAPTCHA by calling the provided showNewCAPTCHA function, which will return the correct text answer to our CAPTCHA. We'll then ask the user for their answer, store their response into a variable called answer, and then check if their answer is a valid one. If it's a valid answer, we'll update valid input to true. That way, the next time our program checks the conditional on this loop, it'll exit the loop and continue with the rest of our program. And if the user gives us an invalid answer, notify them and iterate through the loop again. Valid input will remain unchanged in our else statement. Finally, once we obtain a valid answer and have left the loop, we'll want our function to return the user's answer to our main program. Our current program is case sensitive, so ASDF is not the same as ASDF with a capital D. If we want to accept a variety of capitalizations, for instance, we can add a function that will convert the user's input into lowercase. We can do the same to the valid answer variable to ensure that both are set to lowercase when we compare them. With that, your validation function is complete. It uses an indefinite iteration to continue asking a question until it has valid answers. Then, once it does, it'll return the user's answer to the main program. Now that you've gotten an introduction to indefinite iterations and seen an example in more detail, try modifying our CAPTCHA function so that the user is given exactly 3 tries to provide a valid input.